Hi Flosstube, it is Helen D. Today we're going to do a tutorial. This is the closest one I could find that was semi-like it. But we're going to do a tutorial for how to attach this little kind of flap on a finish. I believe this is called a flange, only we're going to do a double flange. So it will be this on both sides. The piece that we're going to use is this teeny tiny stitch called Tiny Tim Turkey, and they're not kidding, it was like 24 by 24. This is a Bent Creek, the Littles Tiny Tim Turkey, and this is still available. 24 by 24, 1.5 inches on a 32 count. Mine's on a 28 count, so it's just a tiniest smidge bigger than that. What's nice about the double flange is it's a way to take something that's really teeny tiny and make it just a little bigger. And then you can kind of add some fun extras to it if you want to. You don't need to. So what I have done to kind of streamline the process, this is my stitch. Obviously it was just on a little scrap. I did change the colors. I just picked an orange, a light brown, a dark brown, a green, and I rotated mine because I wanted him facing the other way. So I flipped him. I ironed a little scrap of interfacing on the back. I usually use Pellin 950F just because that's what I use when I make project bags, and I always have scraps. But the super lightweight, which I think is a 44F, any lightweight interfacing that you have would be fine. So I have my stitched piece. I found some fabrics. This is going to be the fabric I use for my flange, and I already cut it. I cut a 2-inch strip, and I need it to go this way and then the other way. So like this little piece, I don't even know how big that is, but it's going to be plenty. I just kind of was like, all right, if I folded this in half, would it be enough to give me enough for each side? And it is. So I folded this in half and ironed so that I have a 1-inch strip ready to go. Then I found my fabric I'm going to use for the wider strip. This hopefully is enough. It should be. This was a strip on there that was just the right size. So I cut mine about 3.5 inches because I know I'll end up cutting that down. Like that would be a lot of cotton fabric with a little tiny bit of stitching. But I thought that would be a good place to start, and then I can cut down. If it were a bigger pillow, you might want to go like 4 inches to start, right? You kind of just have to guess. Whatever you start with, you're going to lose a 1/4 inch on your seams on both sides. So you're going to lose a 1/2 inch. Just keep that in mind. And I interfaced this as well. When I'm making a pillow, I like to interface all of my fabrics on the front and the back because I find that that just helps me get a nice, flatter, less lumpy pillow. I also try to find a fabric that the design won't matter if it's horizontal or vertical. Like I'm going to take this piece and cut it this way and then turn it the other direction. This one's a little busy, like you'll probably be able to notice, but it's not like checkered or something that I really have to worry about matching up. So to get started, I'm going to trim up my stitched piece. When I make a pillow, I like to I cut 3/4 inch from the stitching, and then that gives me room for a 1/4 inch of a seam allowance, and I have a 1/2 inch of fabric showing. If you like less fabric showing, you can cut it a little closer, or cut 3 inches and use a wider seam allowance, right? They'll give you the same thing. So the flange is going to go on the bottom and on the right. I'm going to want a little extra fabric there, but I know on the top and on the left, which will be the corners, like the right sewn to the edge parts of my stitching, I'm going to cut 3/4 inch. So let me start with that. So here's the top, 3/4 inch, and then the side. So to determine how wide I want to cut the sides that will have my fabric piece on it, I'm going to take my 1-inch fabric piece and determine how much fabric I want, how much cloth to show. I like mine kind of tight. You might prefer a wider margin. So if I wanted like just a little tiny bit showing, or if you wanted more showing, you would leave it, right? You'd leave it lower. I want just a little bit showing, like probably the equivalent of 2 8 squares. This one happens to be on a lugana. So I'm going to line that up to right around where I want it and then measure it and see how wide is it to the edge of my flange fabric. And this is about 1 1/8 inches. So I'm going to take this off and I'm going to cut 1 1/8 inches. So that now when I'm sewing, I can line that right up with the edge and go from there. So I'm going to cut 1 1/8 inches, and this is on like the selvage, doesn't matter, it's going to get sewn right over, so don't worry about that. When you're using scraps, sometimes that's what you get, right? Okay. So I have 3/4, 3/4, 1 1/8 1 1/8. So now I'm going to take my flange and just come in here and cut a piece off. I cut a piece off the size of my bottom. I'm going to start with the bottom. So now I can sew this up. You can put a clip on it if you think you want to, and it's lined right up. I'm going to come in here and sew this on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we'll just do this right on camera because it should be pretty quick. Sorry, that part's off camera, but it's just me sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that piece is now on there. So now I come in with the other strip and again line that right up with the edge. I'm going to clip it on, and I'm going to come down here and sew this one. 1/4 inch seam allowance. I can cut off some of this extra stuff on the bottom. It's just going to kind of be in the way. So now I'll do that side with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now I'm 1/4 inch all around. So now I'm just going to trim this up to get my extra off. So I'm just lining up right with the edge of my stitching fabric and cutting off these extras to give me another perfect square, or mostly perfect square. So now my flange is on. So now I come in with my other fabric and I have to figure out again, now how much of the flange do I want to show? Do I want just a little tiny 1/4 inch? Do you want more? Are you planning on doing some kind of decorative stitch where you might want a little more of it showing? I'm probably going to leave about a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to take my big piece and again cut it so I have a piece roughly the size of my square. And really hope that I have enough this way, but I may not. I may need to go iron a new piece. That's okay. So for this, I'm going to come in here and line them up on the bottom and put a clip on. And then I need to figure out, where do I want to sew to give myself that 1/4 of an inch on this side. So what I'm going to do is kind of come in here and just lightly line it up to how much I want and press it. So then I can go on the unpress it, and I can measure right here and see how much of a seam allowance do I need to leave myself. And it looks like a 1/2 inch plus a quarter of an inch. So 3/4 of an inch, exactly. Yeah, 3/4 of an inch. So I will come in here, and it doesn't really matter which side, and I will zip through 3/4 of an inch. Again, everything is lined up. Now we'll see how this looks. Sorry, everything's kind of tucked away over here for lights and cameras and all that jazz. Moment of truth. That's going to look good. So that will give me just a little peek, and then my fabric. So now you'll go to your ironing board and iron this down so it stays. And then one other thing you can do before you sew on the other side, we have a whole lot of extra fabric here that we don't need that much. So now that I know I'm good, I'm just going to come in here and cut this a lot closer just to get some of the bulk out. So I left myself about a 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance. So now, again, I'm going to come in here, and I will go iron this in just a second. I'm going to come in here and square this up. I missed. And then I will need my next strip. I'm going to have to go cut another strip, I think, because you need it to be wide enough to be the whole length. Now, if I don't want this much showing, right, I might make this work, because if I were to cut however much this selvage piece is off of both at the end, then I'm good. I think I'm good. But I am going to pause and go just iron this flat. All right, we're all ironed down. One thing I forgot to mention, there's really no right or wrong way as to which side you decide to do first. It's just kind of like stitching, where you always want to cross your stitches in the same direction. If you start with the bottom on the flange, start with the bottom on the top piece. And that way, this little extra flap and the seams will kind of look similar. They'll be on the same side. So if you want to do the side first, go for it. It really doesn't matter. So this one now, I just flip it over. I'm going to line it up with the top because I know I'm trimming that bottom up. And then again, we come in here with 3/4 of an inch. There we go. Mine aren't exactly the same. Like, I can tell there's a little more on the side. If that bothered me, I could just fold it back over and do another line a little closer. For me personally, it's close enough. But if you were way off, just fold it back over and come in just, you know, a little smidge on the other side here, and then try again and they would match up. I'm gonna again cut this bulk out. And then I'm again gonna go iron. Be right back. Here we are, all ironed down. So now we just have to decide how much of this fabric do we want showing in our final piece. Like I know for a fact I need to trim here. So let's start with that. So if I were to trim that off, I'm measuring from this line. So I'm going to say from this line where the flange and the outer fabric are connected, if I left 2 inches, that would just cut off the edge, which is what I need to cut off that much. So if I cut off 2 inches and then I have a 1/4 inch for my seam allowance, that will leave about 1 3/4 inches showing. So we'll go 2 inches and then I'm going to turn it, and now I'm measuring from this seam. This is a 2-inch ruler, so that makes it easy. Line it up. 2 inches. So now I kind of look at this and think, is that too much? Do I want a little less showing? I think I'm going to go with it. So again, we're going to lose 1/4 inch. It's a lot of fabric. I'm going to cut another 1/4 inch off, just because it's such a tiny piece. I don't want it to be overwhelmed. But this is completely dependent on what your piece is, right? Like if you had a bigger piece, having a little extra fabric on there wouldn't look as overwhelming as having this teeny tiny 1.5 inch piece. Oops, I wiggled. All right, so we'll probably go with that. So that will be what we end up having for the size minus 1/2 inch. So now the thing that I like to do, and we can move these, if you want to do any kind of embellishing, now's the time, before you sew the front of the pillow onto the back. So for this one, I came in and did a herringbone stitch. For this one, sometimes when I do both sides, I like to add a button or a charm or a something right here to kind of cover the seams. I pulled 3 to audition. So I have an orange. That might be a little much orange. I had this brown with kind of a funky pattern on it. And then I also had this kind of rustic. And I think that one's personally my favorite. So the rustic. Then you can also decide, do you want to add any embellishing stitch? You could do a herringbone stitch. You could just make little X's, little cross stitches, whatever you might want to add. This would be the time to put them in. Keep in mind, you're going to lose a 1/4 inch. So if I were doing a herringbone, I'd start from the edge and it'd be fine. You're going to sew it in. But if I were doing little X's, I'd probably do my first one in a little bit so that then when I sew it, I don't lose half of it. For me, I don't think, again, being such a tiny piece, it needs a lot of extras. I'm just going to come in and sew this button in. And I grabbed some thread. I usually use sulky thread for a lot of my hand stitching because it's thicker than DMC and I have a whole bunch of colors. So I have way more colors of sulky than I do regular sewing thread. So it just makes it easier to figure out a color match. Sorry, I'm threading my needle. Not threading that needle. Whew. Sometimes on these tutorials, the easiest thing is what gives me the most trouble. picked a green because it matched the green I used here for the accent. So I'm just going to come in and sew this on. I'm going to kind of line it up so that it covers some of my little seams. And then sew that down a couple times. So after this is on, for me, this is it for this tutorial. If you were to sew, like I said, some kind of decorative stitch, now would be the time to do it. From here on, I just finish them the same way I would a regular pillow. And I do have a separate tutorial for putting together a basic pillow. So from here, it really is just a basic pillow. I will cut a piece of backing fabric the same size as this, and then put the interfacing on it, and then sew them together. I usually leave a hole in the bottom or the side, usually the bottom, and that's where I stuff. Some people like to cut a slit and do it that way, so it's whichever one works better for you. I'm having a hard time lining this up. There we go. So whichever one works for you, and then if you want to add trim, you can add trim. I didn't even look at trim yet to see if I had anything the right color. To tie this off, I'm just kind of going under the interfacing a little bit, and then I'll go under again and make a loop and pull my knot through. I will link that basic finishing video below. I've also done videos on how to do chenille trim and pom-pom trim and cording trim. So if you want to do a trim, those are kind of some of the basic options. But this is ready to go. Like I said, I'll sew it up, and then I may add some trim, and I'll have a new piece when Thanksgiving rolls around again. So one other thing I guess to keep in mind, like on this, because we went with such a tight border here, you might not want, like I might go a little closer, not my 1/4 inch, I might go a 1/2 inch so that I have a similar border on these when I actually sew it together. So just a little something else to keep in mind is you may need to adjust what you do for a border here to get it to match what you did for a border on the inside. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you for the next tutorial. Bye.